So in this video I would like to talk to you about how we represent vectors. On pen and paper we represent vectors by using these arrows. Okay, the arrows have an initial point and there is an arrowhead on the other side. The initial point we can mark by, for example, A, and the arrowhead represents the direction in which the vector is pointing. The direction of the vector is represented by this arrowhead, and the length of this arrow is a representation of the magnitude of the vector. So if I want to draw a force vector, let us say a force of 5 newtons in the vertical direction towards the top like this, I can say that this length is 5 centimeters. I can draw this using a ruler, that this this length is of 5 centimeters, and we can say that this 5 centimeter represents 5 newtons of force, and the force, the arrow points in this direction, therefore the force is pretty much in this direction. Okay, and we can name the final point as A, B, C, or whatever. Okay, let us say that we want to represent a force. I'm just using force as a standard example. You can represent pretty much any vector like this. Let us say that I have the x-axis right over here, I have the y-axis right over here. I'm sure you're familiar with these basic notions of x and y-axis, and I have the origin right over here. And let us say that I want to represent a force that is acting at 45 degree with x-axis, a force that makes an angle of 45 degree with the x-axis, or maybe a force that represents okay, let's do the 45 degree first, and then we can go to another example. So 45 degree is like this, but you notice that my definition was not complete. I only said that a force that makes an angle of 45 degree with the x-axis. I did not specify the magnitude of the force. So in principle this thing should be wrong. If I can specify the magnitude of the force, only then can I draw this arrow. Otherwise the length of this arrow is not representing anything at this moment, because I have not specified the magnitude. So if I say that a force of 3 newtons, if I say that a force of 3 newtons that is at an angle of 45 degree with the x-axis, then I can make sense of this particular length. I can say that maybe this length is 6 centimeters, okay, and I say 6 centimeters represents 3 newtons, therefore 1 centimeter represents half a newton. Right? In this particular case, I said that 5 centimeter represents 5 newton, therefore 1 centimeter represents 1 newton. So in various scenarios you can take various scales, but you need to mention them somewhere, right? So here I have shown you that 6 centimeters represents 3 newtons, so 1 centimeter represents half a newton, and you can see that I have clearly made that this force makes an angle of 45 degree with the x-axis. So that is how we pictorially represent vectors. Now when we have to write down vectors, then we use this particular symbol. So A represents any vector. It can be a force, it can be a velocity, it can be just a vector without any name. There are such vectors without any name in mathematics, of course, but in physics we have a name for almost all of the vectors. For example, the momentum vector, the angular momentum vector, the angular velocity vector, the magnetic field vector, so on and so forth, right? So let us say that A is any vector. So we, in order to specify that A is a vector, we put this particular arrow sign on top of A. And in some books they use this particular convention, but in some books what they do is they use boldface letters. So they use boldface letters in print. So this is also an accepted convention, that when you are printing, that in print you can use boldface letters to represent a vector. Okay, now there are two conventions over here. Two conventions regarding the representation of the magnitude of a vector. The magnitude of the vector A can be either represented like this. This represents the magnitude of the vector A, or you can simply say A. Either of this is accepted. Okay, we prefer this one over this one. This one is more clear, and this one is the most used one. Okay, that you can use the vector A surrounded by 2 bar brackets, I guess. These things are called bar brackets as far as I know, the modulus symbol, but pretty much they represent the magnitude of the vector A. Okay, or you can simply use the vector A without the arrow sign to say that it represents the magnitude of the vector A. So these are some signs and symbols that you need to keep in mind in order to communicate with your peers or your teachers or your friends when you want to talk about vectors with them, which is, I guess, very seldom.